Hey,
Hey,
how's it going?
it's going. Things are good.
Good.
Did you see the ops documentation PR that I started?
No, not yet. I saw you tag me on something or reviewed something. Is that related to the differs that were spewing errors 3 days ago?
No,
Okay.
it's just documentation, just reorganizing.
Oh, okay. Cool. Let's see.
I think there's still like a lot that I should clean up about the writing there. I just want to make sure that that structure seems sensible and clearer than what we had.
Okay.
And since you're the person who originally organized it all, I
Yeah,
figured
yeah,
you
yeah. I appreciate it. Let's see.
thoughts.
Polls. Ah, right. So at some point we'd said the README should be about what is this, and everything that was in the README, which was really how to create a new cluster, should be in how to create a new cluster.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I shoved into a directory called Kubernetes
Right.
and
Setup guide.
yeah, I've renamed templates to Kubernetes.
Got it.
Just to like clearly segregate between like cluster configuration and like other random manual stuff.
Great. Uh-huh. Yeah, GitHub is not doing a great job of trying to show me what you changed about the README.
Yeah, because it's so reorganized. I think I added that convenience link to just look at the branch. I think that might be the easier way to go.
Okay, yeah.
Since I just moved the old README and replaced it with something completely different.
Yeah, okay, I'll look at the file.
There's really like very little value in trying to look at a diff.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I like the link to manually managed. Uh-huh.
Hi, Tasseli. I don't know if we've met. Who are you? Tasseli. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name.
Oh, that's funny. I don't know how Tasseli's name got on my phone. This is Gretchen.
Oh. Hey.
That's so funny. Sorry.
That could have been confusing for a while.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Oh, you know what? She used my phone to do a Zoom call, and it must have like auto stayed signed into her account
Yeah.
a few days ago.
Cool. I was just looking at Rob's rewrite of our documentation for how to deploy this contraption. And yeah, the structure seems good. I'm trying to think of anything to do differently. Let me look at the directory structure for a minute. So Kubernetes used to be called templates.
Yeah.
And the setup guide used to be documents that were all at the top level and have now been moved into a setup guide.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's a little bit weird because now like Kubernetes contains like documentation-y stuff plus configuration files.
Yeah.
But it seems overly nested to try and go deeper. I was also struggling with, like, I think you named those templates initially because you were looking at Helm and thinking about ways to treat those more as templates rather than as configuration files.
Right.
But I think the result was that it was a little confusing because they aren't really templates that get filled in.
That is true.
And I was also going to get rid of the examples directory and just put some kind of like secrets.example.yaml in the config file directory.
You think you put a copy in at top level or in production and in staging?
I asked myself the same question and did not yet have an answer.
Yeah.
Probably one each in production and staging, I guess.
We already have a ton of code duplication between the two, so
That is true.
might as well in for a penny, in for a pound on that.
Is there, do you know if Kubernetes has a useful or feasible way to reduce that? Probably not.
I think that's Helm.
Yeah, okay, that's sort of the idea there. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess all that would also fit more easily if we actually had separate clusters for staging and production instead of separate namespaces.
Right.
Although I don't know if that's worthwhile right now.
I think I've seen this pattern too, that, you know, it is a pain to have these things potentially diverge. It cuts into the safety of staging being a good proxy for production. But if you're careful, you can avoid that, you know, and if you review changes that you make to one and the other. And I think somewhere I picked up that the evolutionary pressures on the two can be different. So like in draft one, you see a lot of don't repeat yourself opportunities, but as the drafts go on, you get more and more special cases where trying to parameterize out the differences becomes more confusing.
Yeah, I hear that.
I don't know, for staging and production, that really shouldn't be that true. I don't know how much I buy that, but it's a decent theory. So I haven't made any progress on the package split, but I did think about it. So I think it will happen.
Okay. Just let me know if you find yourself at a point where you're stuck, you just don't really have the time.
Okay. Got it. And you let me know if I'm like blocking a big opportunity to pull that out,
Yeah, I mean, it's not really like blocking. I feel like one of the things I've been struggling with lately is something I've probably like whined about a little bit for a long time, but I'm feeling more and more since I've been going to the Code for San Francisco hack nights.
Yeah.
Because occasionally it's very like boom and bust there. Like some nights, so there's like at the beginning there's a little like pitch session where people can talk about their projects, and since I go all the time, I have my own slide as like an ongoing part of the community project. And so I'll talk about it, and like some nights, like one or two people wander over afterwards and are interested in the project. And some nights it's like 8 or 9 or 10 people. And like the problem of the project being so split up and each part being totally different tools and languages and everything, like makes onboarding more than one or two people at a time impossibly hard. Because unless everybody's just like, oh, we're all like just want to like work on React and user interface stuff, then it's like, okay, I have to find a way to be like you to like go try and run this project while I help these other people, or it's like.
Got it. It hadn't really occurred to me the way in which pulling this out helps with that problem, which was part of the goal of splitting it up in general. But that's great.
And it's also, I mean, like when you just have a couple of people, it's still tough because processing is kind of a grab bag, but also tough because everything is just different. So, like part of the reason I now want to pull that out more, definitely not the only reason, but part is that.
Did we decide what to call it yet?
No. I was kind of wondering whether we should try and get in touch with whoever owns the current Wayback on PyPy.
Yeah.
Because this, I think, has more to it.
Yeah.
It covers similar ground.
Right.
Although that one uses the straight time map API, and that's the part that we're missing and haven't done yet.
Right, so I recall. But we could sort of say, hey, if we added time map, do you mind if we take this space?
Yeah.
And here's a commit bit. Why don't we go on that theory? I mean, we don't need to upload it to PyPy to have it be usable yet. So why don't we go on that theory and then just do a painful rename, or make the PyPy name different than the package name, which is annoying but doable. If we can.
I'd like to avoid that.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, alternatively, like, what's a good alternative name? Like, probably Wayback something.
Yeah.
Wayback Loader or
Wayback CDX, but that's too tightly scoped.
Yeah. Yeah, that was also my first thought. Like, oh, Wayback CDX, oh, too tightly scoped. Wayback Search, same thing.
Yeah. Wayback Rester.
Yeah.
Python Wayback. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate that. I'm kidding.
I think also there is a Python Wayback or a PyWayback, and that is like the implementation of the Wayback machine.
Wayback client?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's good.
All right.
Also, that is the name of the principal class in there, so like that actually fits really well. All right.
Great. Other stuff that will be balking on this. I have like a whole cookie cutter that I use for projects, work, and personal that throws in like Flake8, Travis, blah, 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 blah. Are you fine with just basically the same thing we did with web monitoring processing, Sphinx docs?
Yeah, I'm fine if you want to do that. If I was going to do it, the thing I was thinking about was whether it would be worth. Never mind, it wouldn't. Never mind. Just in my head, I was like, oh, maybe this would be an opportunity to experiment with poetry, but that's much more geared towards application rather than library.
I only vaguely know what that is. It has come up with.
So it's alternative to PyM, or not PyM, to PipM.
Oh, okay.
So I think the way I have read them is PipM is the like, how do we wrap up the crazy mess of existing tools for Python into something that feels like a usable dependency manager?
Yeah.
And poetry is sort of like there's just too many different conceptual approaches buried in that rat's nest of tools, and so there's too many issues when you try and do that, and which is borne out by the crazy changes and incompatibilities through versions in PipM. So poetry is just like, let's take all the lessons from those, but write a new cohesive thing from scratch to be a good dependency manager.
Nice. Yeah, I
So
think
that's poetry is fancy and new from scratch, but learn the lessons. And PipEmp is like, don't take the things that we have and make them somehow work together.
got it. The one thing that I think is a bit weird about the way we're doing web monitoring processing now is super strict pinning in requirements.txt is not really tenable as a library. It's more tenable as a thing you deploy. And I remember you and I
Yes.
having a conversation about this, and I think I had my own preconceived things of just this is the way we always do things in sci-fi land. And having thought about it since, I think we sort of need two different sets of requirements. We need, here are the minimum versions that work. If you have an environment with other requirements, we will mesh with them. And then we need one that's like, here's the exact versions that we actually deploy.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. From my perspective, the situation we have is okay, if not good, for web monitoring processing, because functionally we use it more as an application than a library, than a
That's right.
package. But totally for when we pull out Wayback, I agree. Like it should be a much looser range of it's a compatibility range, not a like what you should be running with range. Which is why I was about to say like it was a good opportunity to test out using poetry, and then I was like, oh wait, never mind, because poetry's value is more in locking that down a little more,
Right.
or PipEmp also.
To first order, I would say a low-level library like Wayback Client should have no upper pin, because if we drift off and someone else picks it up later.
I always struggle with that, because I do feel like an upper pin on like next major version, if a dependency is theoretically using semantic versioning,
right,
might be smart, because it helps prevent somebody from tripping into a future situation that won't work, that is expected often to not work.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I've seen just as many situations where that does not introduce an incompatibility, but it makes it really hard to upgrade if like one of the packages somewhere in your pile of dependencies recalcitrantly says like, I'm compatible with 3.x, but 4.x doesn't exist yet, and I've declared that I won't be compatible with 4.x because it's highly likely I might not be, but that's not true, and then you're like stuck. Like I worked on some stuff for Asana earlier this year where AWS does that for their package.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bodo. Bodo does that for requests. And it does it really strictly. It's like we're compatible up to like 3.28. You know, like in 28, it's not out yet. It's just declaring like the next version we don't know, and so it just
that paranoia may be justified in the form of request. You know, like the core developer request had his commit bit revoked by the team because he kept doing like rogue releases that would break the world because request is a dependency on everything.
Whoa, I did not know that. Was that Kenneth Wrights or?
Yeah. There was a bunch of bad stuff with him earlier.
I did not know that.
And that particular story came out. Really smart guy, but maybe not like the guy you want leading the stable, essential web project for Python. Anyway.
Right.
But yeah, that can be really annoying if in fact the next version works and you have something else that needs it. So I don't know.
I didn't know that particular history with requests. So maybe in that particular case it does make sense.
Yeah.
That also makes me wonder if like Wayback Client should just drop down a level and depend on URL 3.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. Request is pretty nice. And I think it's being managed better now. We lost Gretchen.
We did.
Too much inside baseball. All right. So that seems like a plan. Seems like if we need maybe deploy upper bound pins judiciously, and Wayback Client is the name. Similar CI stack to web monitoring processing. No, wait, we have web monitoring processing running on Travis for docs and Circle for CI. I would be equally happy with Circle for CI to make it consistent with everything else we do, and using read the docs instead of Travis.
Sure.
Okay.
The reason we're using Travis is because we're using Doctor, and Doctor doesn't yet have good Circle CI support. Was that the issue?
And the reason we're using Doctor is I didn't feel there were very compelling reasons for read the docs, and I've had a lot of problems doing the remote build on read the docs, whereas with Travis, you've got Travis, and then I've already built the docs because I want to make sure they built as part of my test suite, so I might as well upload those artifacts. Seems like a fundamentally better model, but read the docs has gotten a lot more stable since we made that call and has started adding shiny things, like you can now in your in the block of services like CodeCov and Circle and stuff in GitHub, you can see the rendered preview of what the pull request will do to your docs.
Oh, nice.
So in order to remove the specialness of one, I still use Travis for everything, and I'm still pretty happy with Doctor. But given the fact that we use Circle for everything else, maybe I'll drop Travis and Doctor from this.
That sounds fine to me. I'm also okay if we continue using both, although for any given project, I think it would be better to consolidate. Yeah. But I would also say at this point, feel somewhat agnostic about whether Travis or Circle is the right place to consolidate. Like I used to be very pro Circle, and since version 2.0, I feel like there are so many like sort of kind of weird half-done things in there, and their docs so frequently have issues, but moreover, like the configuration is so complex. Like it lets you do some cool stuff that is hard or not possible in Travis, but like getting it right the first time is so hard. I'm kind of like, whatever. Like the only super winning feature that Circle maintains for me over Travis is the one that it originally had, which was, it's the biggest one that it originally had, which
SSH.
is SSH.
Yeah.
When you have some weird ass problem that's so unbelievably helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in a weird transitional state, right? I think I'm seeing the SciPy community slowly adopt Azure, and then in at least one case drop everything except Azure. They're giving more away for free. It seems like there's a lot of power there, but their Stack Overflow backlog is like not as good as Travis and Circle, right? Travis seems to be the universally used one in my world, except now everyone's worried about the layoffs in Berlin that were really big.
Oh, yeah, I heard a little bit about that because they got acquired. Yeah.
So nobody's quite sure about that, and there have been some like higher incidents of weird issues. So I almost feel like there's no good option. I'd say it's too early to move to Azure. Circle 2.0 is too complicated to use, and Travis might be in trouble. So.
Okay. Well, so then it seems like maybe for a Wayback Client, if you're cool or even wanting to try and see how well it works to lean on read the docs to do the actual build, then let's just throw away Travis, Circle CI, and do the docs build and read the docs.
Sounds good. I think that's probably the easiest set of things to do.
Sweet.
Other decisions to make about that? I can't think of any. Great. And if we do manage to get the Wayback name, we can just make them aliases. That's something PyPy lets you do now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, cool. Can you maybe see about reaching out to the Wayback person since you have better Wayback connections?
Yes, I can see about that. I'm fairly certain that package is not maintained by Internet Archive in any way. There's no affiliate.
But if the request came from them or someone who could plausibly,
Oh, gotcha. Yes. I will phrase it from the, like, we've been working tightly with the Internet Archive to
Right.
do this thing. Yes.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. I'll see about reaching out to them about that then.
cool. I've got a long train ride on a week from today, so if not before, hopefully then.
Cool. And again, like, let me know if you get stuck or feel like you thought you'd get time, but just don't.
We'll do. I'll try not to sit on it longer than a week from today.
Cool. What's the other thing? Oh, in that same vein of splitting things out.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive in more on that,
Yeah.
Gretchen, did you have any stuff you wanted to go over or ask or anything?
No, not particularly.
Okay. Just want to make sure so that we weren't, like, kind of ignoring you for half an hour. Anyway, in that same vein, because now I'm on this kick of, like, the grab bag of things, and the Python one makes it confusing for new people. I have been trying to think through, like, one of the other issues I've been struggling with lately is the, like, what feels to me like problematic sort of seams between DB and processing. It's not so bad that, like, DB has a proxy endpoint to do a diff from processing, but it is, like, it does get stupendously wonky when we run the auto analysis, because that's a job in DB, and all the logic is in DB, but it calls out to do a bunch of diffs and then does some logic against those diffs.
Mm-hmm.
And in this situation, and this is also why I've, like, hung back a little while on adding sort of, did a keyword we care about change as part of the priority algorithm? Because like, I can sort of reassemble that information from the text diff, but there's plenty of other stuff to do in there that would be like, oh, I want to go get the source and parse it myself. But then as soon as I start doing that, there's, like, an extreme amount of redundancy between DB and what we have in processing.
Yeah.
And so I've been struggling lately with trying to figure out, like, do I need to take that DB job and rewrite it entirely in Python? And then does that just land as another random thing in processing? Is the right thing for, like, processing to become the place for all those sorts of scripts, and I extract the actual differ and diff server into a separate module? It's like bug monitoring diffs or something.
What if the diffing server got rewritten in Rails, and we had a library, the processing just became a library of things that took in something like a request or a header and a content body and returned JSON? Is that a more sensible split?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Like, that's a tough split to make now, because it wouldn't fit well for Internet Archive now that they're using a diffing server.
Oh, yeah.
And so I guess there's some question of, like, how much extra special sauce do we have in the server part that they need? versus like if there's not much, maybe it's not a big deal that we take away the server. They just have to write like a little shim layer somewhere else that they have stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe it is a big deal.
Well, we could leave it in there, but like deprecate it and not use it, and make its dependencies optional dependencies. We don't. I mean, or put it off in its own package that we tell them it's their job to maintain. I don't know. We don't need to delete the Python Tornado server if it's useful to them, but we also don't need to maintain it.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, the flip side, the other thing I'm struggling with about DB was, at some point I had wanted to rewrite it in Python, so it wasn't yet another language, and
Yeah.
it seemed like most people were sticking around were Python folks. Although now I have a friend who's committed some to DB, but he's not a Python person at all. But he is like a very good Rails person. So I was fairly sure, and I sort of asked him about it, and now I'm very sure that like he probably wouldn't continue committing to it if it stopped being a Rails app.
Yeah.
And so
I think it's not at all obvious that rewriting that in Python is a good use of time.
Yeah, I struggle with like the amount of time it would take versus the theoretical benefit of making it more accessible to people, and B, easier to talk with stuff in processing, because it could pull in processing as a library rather than as like not being able to talk directly to it, needing a REST API or needing some command line API or something else. And like the command line API, then like the Rails app now also has to bundle Python in it, so it can run the command line API.
Yeah. And you're doing inter-process serialization, which maybe doesn't matter. Most of this stuff is pretty CPU heavy.
Yeah. Not super worried about that aspect of it. Like communications overhead is relatively minor in the analysis and diffing realm compared to CPU. Right? If we spend 10 seconds in the CPU, it doesn't matter that we spend 100 milliseconds talking.
If we're not sure that we're going to move it all to Python, then moving some things back to Rails is not crazy. It's not creating that much more work for ourselves in the future than we already would have if we decided to rewrite the whole thing in Python. So then the reason to have the diffing server is to be able to communicate over HTTP instead of over a command line. That also, not only do you avoid bundling, the server lets us avoid bundling Python with the Rails app, it also lets us avoid putting them on the same machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you could run the command line over some.
Yeah, well, this is why, like one of the things I was thinking about, right? I was talking about that weird split in the analysis part, where like half the analysis logic is doing the diffs and it calls out to the diffing server for that, and half the analysis logic is like embedded in this Rails job, which also like creates a situation where there, like I always have some concerns about like long-term sustainability and viability of this project, and wanting to structure things so that like hopefully they're maximally reusable by others for other purposes. And that's really hard when this like analysis logic is split across two places versus like if you could encapsulate it all in a Python function that just says like analyze these things. That's a probably usefully reusable piece for other people.
So I would be sold on doing all the analysis in Python, but I think that's a view heavily weighted by the fact that it would be then easier for me to deal with it than it is when it's in Ruby. So I don't really think you should take that view too seriously. The question that maybe I could provide better judgment on is if there is some part of this app that's not written in Ruby, which I think there will be, what is the actual best interface between these pieces? And do we want to think about Ruby maybe submitting something to something like Airflow or Luigi?
In my head, the easiest way into that was more like having DB put stuff on like a queue.
Right. So the interface is Redis, which is already a dependency of the Rails app.
Yeah, I mean, it could be Redis or it could be like SQS or something,
Sure.
right?
But then something on the other side of that queue is consuming work. And that then could be heavily orchestrated like Airflow, or it could be a simple command line thing like we currently have for the import jobs, right?
Yeah. I guess the reason I'm contrasting those as separate choices rather than like possible, yes and, is that like I'm not sure the orchestration we get out of like Airflow adds a whole lot here, and it's a lot of overhead.
Yeah. That's fine. I'm not necessarily pushing for that, I guess.
Okay.
I
mean, if it were something that actually had more of a like data flow to it, because also the problem with Airflow is like moving data from node to node. It's not
right.
You can do it, but it's not designed for you to do it.
Right. The benefit of some kind of system like that, I don't have a lot of hands-on experience with them, but I think I'm going to get some going forward. So it's been on the brain. Is the retries and the error handling and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's also why I think directly using Redis for queuing that work is a bad idea, and we should use something that might be Redis backed, like RabbitMQ. I think can be. I think it can be backed by a bunch of different things. I'm not sure. Or SQS because they encapsulate that logic, right? They have a sense of like dead letter queues and retry up to n times.
Right. Even Kafka, I think, would give you more semantics than Redis does.
Yeah. I think Redis is slightly too primitive. But yeah, like Kafka or Storm or things like Airflow, I guess, also do that. Although Airflow is more orchestration, less just a queue.
Yeah, so I think maybe something in the realm of Kafka is the one I know best. That level is the interface out. Is that the interface in when the UI makes some fancy request?
Yeah, I mean, there's this other, like we sort of talked about at one point before, where like when the UI requests a diff through DB just makes another HTTP call.
Yeah.
And at one point we talked about like, hold on. We talked about whether it should instead be like plopping something on a queue and then checking status.
Right.
Like pulling for it to be done. But like that requires us to write some like extra coordination-y tooling.
I like the idea that it might be well, I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I like the idea that the library that's doing all this diffing could not necessarily have an opinion about how it communicates with the rest of the app, or
Mhm.
have more than one way of doing it, right? The one of the appeals of walk was this idea that this could be done in a single process and communicating over threads or communicating over 0MQ or HTTP or whatever you want,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, from that perspective, like I still deeply appreciate that we have structured the differ sort of in that way, right? Where the diff routines are library-esque, and then you just like, but as long as they have a common-ish interface,
Right.
we can expose them through a relatively agnostic REST API.
Right.
I really like that. And the thing I was thinking, if I, right, because the current setup is that the analysis is split between domains of execution, like for ease of execution,
Right.
versus conceptual domains. But if we put them in conceptual domains, so it's all Python, like I think I would still write it in that form where like analysis is a function that you pass like to
Right.
Gix or some other instance that represents our versions, and it would call the right diffing functions and whatever other crap it wants to do and return those, and then that could be exposed to something that reads off a queue and calls function, or something that makes response to HTTP requests or whatever.
Yeah.
Right, and ways to expose that.
Right. So I guess there's two things then, like moving the analysis code into its conceptual domain, following that sort of library function thing. And then you could just add another endpoint to the diffing server and call that done. That might be like the small version of this. But the other thing the second step we could take at the same time if we wanted to is say, actually, we think that the semantics of HTTP are not ideally suited to handling queued requests, and that we actually want to have the communication between DB and processing be Kafka or something like Kafka.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the semantics of HTTP was, so first off, I hadn't actually even considered exposing it as part of the differ. Not that doesn't make sense. I was just like, my very first response to that was like, seems like a different thing than diffing, so it doesn't belong there.
I see.
In the sense that like a diff is a kind of analysis, maybe it totally does. That's not as much of a conceptual break as I had just assumed without actually thinking hard about it.
Right.
But I do think that the semantics of, for the way we have things set up, which is like analysis takes a while, and the nature of our system is that we're going to get a whole bunch of changes at once that we need to analyze. Like, you need a queue to manage that effectively. The semantics of HTTP are not right, but we could still manage that the way we do analysis today, in the sense that like there could just be sort of a shim job in Rails that's reading off a queue and makes an HTTP request.
Yeah.
When the response comes back, great. And so it's, the analysis routine is exposed by HTTP, but in terms of its coordinated execution,
got it.
HTTP request, it gets called based on a queue.
Got it.
Like that might be a different way to split it up.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I don't think you want to be putting a bunch of Kafka client code in processing necessarily. There had to be some external piece that's doing coordination. And so that piece could be, at that point, the piece that's reading off of Kafka or Rabbit or whatever could at that point be just doing command line stuff, or having a long running Python process that it's, throwing something into somehow. But right. So you could have a thin queue consumer that is reading out of Kafka and calling library functions. That's one way you could do this. And that way you could drop the HTTP component from processing entirely. But we have an HTTP component. We have a user for that component. So what you described, where the consumer is living inside of DB, seems okay to me.
Okay.
At least as an intermediate step.
Maybe that's what I should shoot for there. So it should move most of the logic, everything that's not ask for a priority and then make an annotation based on that priority.
Right.
Into Python land. Do you think I should just expose it on the diff server?
Yeah. I think we should think of that as a processing server, a CPU intensive task server, right?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I want to be slightly more careful with it than that because we do have an external user of it. But I don't know that doing this would affect them too much. I think that
adding a handler and a new path.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might add some heavy-ish requirements.
Are they using R? Oh, I see. Like install requirements.
Well, yeah, because one of the things I probably want to pull on for this is NLTK. At the very least, for like eliminating stop words.
Yeah.
If not for other tools it has, I know this much about NLP.
Yeah.
But I also know I've talked to a few people who are like, oh, I could help you with NLP stuff. And sometimes the barrier has been time. Sometimes it's been like 95% of all NLP people are like not Ruby people and they're Python people. Everything is all over the place. Just give me an understandable Python thing to work on. This is my
do you want to do like extras require while this is in the experimental phase?
Yeah, could do that. It's like just a third requirements file.
You could parse it out of a third requirements file. I usually see that just hard coded in the setup.py. Do you know that the extras require argument to setup?
I thought there was something like that, but like I am not. I can't scroll off like the right names for all the things.
Yeah, I'll send you a new example where I've done this just to make it easy for you to find it.
And I'm always like less sure that I've got it right with Python because my knowledge of the equivalent tools in Ruby and in JavaScript are much better, and so I'm never sure when I'm like conflating something from one of those worlds onto.
Yeah. Right,
because it's pure dependencies in Python as opposed to extras, or pure dependencies in package.json in Node.js land.
Where is, right. There's just two sections that matter for this. There you go. Yeah, so pip, the one limitation is pip install WebMARC processing will always get you whatever the minimum requirements are. So you can never have an extras or you can't have an alternate dependency set that is less than the default dependency set, but you can add things.
Okay.
Anyway, cool. All right, I think that's a good theory. Let's run with that.
Okay. So I should add any NLP related new requires for this stuff as extras require.
Right.
Directly in setup.py.
Right.
Instead of the way we have it now where setup.py pulls from the requirements file.
Right. I think we should keep that for the essential requirements because there are some tools that look for requirements.txt, like Travis will do that for you automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So keep the required dependencies there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That makes sense for that. That'll probably be a little slow to get to well. But that's the right path.
I feel it's sort of a weight off that we have a working theory for splitting things up sensibly without committing to rewriting the Rails app. That's that was a little bit scary.
Right. Yeah.
Not to say we won't ever do it, but it would be if there are some Rails devs out there willing to help. It would be nice to just make it easier to work on one piece. It doesn't need to be all one language. It just needs to be easier to work on, do something coherent on one piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think hopefully my friend Ben, who's the Rails person, will be at Code for SF tonight. Because one of the things he just started to poke at was making sure that the seed script for the database runs as a test.
Nice.
So that we don't ever get in a situation where that script is problematic. But in doing so, he ran headfirst into the problem that I knew about but had forgotten about, that I introduced when I added all the automated analysis stuff, which is you used to be able to, because the way the seed script works is it loads the seed data and then runs it through the import routine. It just like creates a job with that data. So the seed data is rather than in database form, it's in like import request form.
Got it.
And which I thought was super clever. May or may not be true. But the result is that like now doing that, it used to be you could just run that and it would be fine. But now doing that queues automated analysis, which then explodes because it explodes if you don't also have a diff server running.
Right. That's what I thought you were going to say. Cool.
Yeah.
Yep. I see.
So I also want to run this by him because I'm sure he will have some thoughts about like, hey, I did this thing that should have been straightforward, which is just run the seed to database script in test, but it doesn't work because it depends on this other thing.
Yeah. Somehow each component should be a like self-contained sane app, and then these things that know about a particular queue implementation and invoke the library maybe should be like deployment type concerns. Like here's what you need to string it all together.
Yeah, I think it's tough with the automated analysis because it sits on this line of like, well, intrinsic to what the database is doing. Like when new stuff comes in, it should get analyzed.
Yeah.
But there's also a way you could phrase it where it's like, database is just notifying other possible consumers that like there's new data.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's like, it's fuzzy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I might go see about lunch here. Get pretty hungry. You will 1 o'clock, right?
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. Oh yeah. Thank you, dude. Talk to you later.
See ya.